Hey guys, so as usual, I shared a ban list prediction survey to gather your thoughts on what might happen on the next ban list, whenever that might be. And so, before some of you rage in the comments saying like, oh, this is way too early, and I get that, but this kind of video does take me quite a bit of time that I'm doing in my spare time. So, I just want to make sure that there's no chance of a ban list coming out before I get this video out. So that's why I'm doing it that way. And so big thanks to all those that responded. We had a little over 200 responses. And so if you want to make sure to be in part of my next ban list prediction surveys, definitely make sure to check me out on Twitter. And before I continue, big thanks to my sponsors as always. Links and discount codes in the description below for Yu-Gi-Oh supplies. Now, in terms of the player profile of those that responded to my survey, you had a good chunk of competitive players, those who are going to locals and at least regional level events consistently, and some YCS level events consistently, and then also semi-competitive, and these are those who will at least go to local events consistently, and then a small chunk of casual players who are more so playing just online, for example, or maybe just playing with friends. Now, in terms of the actual predictions, we're going to start with Dimensional Barrier, and we had a 21% predict I will actually get banned on the next list. I kind of thought this would be higher. I mean, me personally, I think this card is definitely worthy of getting banned, but if you disagree, fine with that. It's certainly not the healthiest card in this current format. Really hits a lot of top decks, and just lingering effects that don't let you play for a whole turn, not really the best. And 9% predicting and get limited. I mean, that might be have an impact on some decks, but realistically, the main issue with this card is with Labyrinth, who can just turbo it out. So whether it's at 1 or 3, doesn't really make too big of a difference. And then next we have, along the same theme, is that Eradicator Epidemic Virus. Again, it's another card that, a deck like Labyrinth can turbo out. And this has never really been too much of an issue in the past, of course. Not too many decks could play it. I mean, Sprite, during its Tier 1 format, also did play it, or at least could play it, because Gigantic could go to 3200, for example. And, especially with a card like Red Reboot gone, you just can't really stop this. I mean, I guess one way to stop it would be Forbidden Droplet, discard or trap so that monster is less than whatever the attack required for this in the draw phase, but that's really, really niche. And so I think this is another card that's potential for getting banned, but really would not be surprised if it did not get hit on the next list. And then we have Pot of Prosperity. So I know I say this with every prediction, but I swear this card will get limited at some point. I think it is far too strong. I love this card, but you've constantly had these tier 1 decks being able to use this card now, and it just increases the consistency so much, and it's just unreal, especially post side when you're trying to dig for cards, something like D-Barrier, right, or a Pointer of the Red Lotus. I think it's far too strong. And if Pot of Desires got limited initially, this is certainly a card that will also get limited at some point. Maybe they start with a semi-limit. I don't know if it's for the next list, but I think at some point it will be on the list. And then we have Super Poly, which, at this time around, not many people expecting it to get banned or hit in any fashion compared to if when I had asked this during tier format, for example. It's a really strong card. You can't respond to it, which makes it pretty not the best. But I think right now in this format, we do have a lot of branded. Some are playing it, but a lot has also cut Super Poly entirely just because they're playing multiple of the same cards in their extra deck for that Kashir matchup. So it's a little split, I would say. But all in all, I think it's a very, very strong card. It was limited at one point, right? And so perhaps it goes back to that state, but for now I don't think so. And then we have Branded Fusion, and I'm surprised that a big chunk, 39%, actually thought it would get limited for the next list. Don't get me wrong, it's a very strong card. Branded is one of the better decks in the format right now, but it's certainly not something that's tier 0 or anything. And realistically, we do have more branded support coming out in Cyberstorm Access in May, and so there's no way at least I think there's no way they're gonna hit that even before that comes out. And then if they are actually by far the best deck at that point, they could probably revisit it and think of limiting this card. But I think at this point, this is certainly probably not gonna get hit. And then similar along the lines, Brand Loss, no one really predicted a change for this one in the next list, in the next list, but in the next format with Cyberstorm Access, if Branded again becomes a little too strong, perhaps Branded Loss is actually something more worthy of at least a hit, and it would have to get banned because everyone only plays it at 1, because not being able to respond is pretty strong. And then we have Branded Expulsion, and this one had the highest percentage in terms of, among all the cards that I listed, what they thought would get banned. 53%, really, really high. Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, people don't like that card. You can't play. And so, if Gimmick Puppet were to get banned, then you just have the Raw Lock, and there's probably other candidates as well. And so, you know what? Perhaps this is something they could at least hit, especially if they hit other decks too, because, being locked out of the game, never really fun. And speaking of Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, if obviously you would hit either one or the other on the next list. I mean, knowing Konami, perhaps they just hit Gimmick Puppet, but I think the actual problem card is Expulsion. But you guys can feel free to disagree. And then we're moving on to the Sprite cards, my babies. So Sprite Blue, a quarter, thinking it would get limited on the next list. I don't know. I like to think it probably won't get hit. I think it is certainly one of the strongest decks right now again, but I wouldn't really say it's necessarily too unfair. I think if anything, maybe Starter is probably the hit they would have to do for consistency, but I don't think they would do that right away. But just some thought. And along the similar lines, Sprite Jet, I had put this on here because even though blue is the best card or starter, but you know what? I think OCG did hit Jet, which was a little bit of a weird hit, not gonna lie, but that's why I put it on here, but most don't expect any kind of change to this card. And speaking of starter, 37% think it'll get limited. This might get limited at some point in the future, though. It is a really strong card, and if it does get hit, then it certainly affects consistency. And not only that, it makes Sprite a really normal summon reliant, and so it would be really hard to play, especially going second. But of course, there is some pseudo cards that kind of act like starter, like E-Telly, which can bring out the Gamma, which is a level 2, which is sort of going on right now. But nonetheless, who knows if this will get hit at this point. And then moving on to some Cashier cards, although this is a bit more generic in terms of Fenrir. So, this was actually brought up as a candidate even on my last ban list prediction, which I thought was a little too early to hit Cashier already. And even now, it probably won't get hit in terms of the main deck monsters, but I could be wrong. But a really big chunk thinking it will get limited. It's certainly a really strong card and a potential candidate for hits, at least in the future. And then along that line, we also have Cashier Unicorn, which in Cashier is definitely, your best main deck monster compared to other decks for, generic purposes. Fenrir is, of course, the best in those situations. But Unicorn, really on its own, can really start a lot of plays. And so a very, very strong card. Will they hit it already? Probably not. But, something worth considering. And then we have the extra deck Monster Shiner Era. Most don't predict this to get changed in any fashion. And I think that's fair. Like, yes, the zone locking is not fun, but realistically, the real enabler of that zone lock is Mind Hacker, which is something I'll talk about later. But on this, this card on its own, really, it's a great card. Is it worth banning or hitting in any fashion? I'm not too sure about that. And then we have some other Cashier cards, the Spell to Special Out. Again, another card that's not really expecting any form of change, and, I think pretty agreeable. Rebirth. So, this card is really strong. It's actually insane how it has 3 amazing effects, and you can use all of it all in the same turn. Now, will it be ever hit on a ban list? Maybe not, right? Realistically, if you were to ever hit Cashier, if you hit, like, the actual names, then, this card doesn't actually end up being that much of a problem, at least not too much, and they would actually need this card even more if those names are kind of hit, right? Similar to how Tier Limits, all those names were hit. But you know what? I think for now, it's totally fine. And then we also have Planet, again, another card that's not really expected to get any kind of change on the next list, and I also agree with that. It's a great field spell, of course, certainly not nearly as amazing as the Tier Limit field spell was with all that interaction, especially once the Shizu cards came out and you can just sort of like pop cards on will, and so, this card, great card, not as good though, and probably won't get hit. And then we have like a pseudo Cashier card, but also for Flunder, of course. Dimension Shifter, which, funnily enough, in terms of whether it will get changed, really not that much anymore compared to the last format where a lot of people thought this would get hit. The OCG, I believe, put this at 2 a couple lists ago, which is interesting. People would still play it at 2, but of course the consistency of drawing it will be much lower. And I think, this is definitely not a card that's like the healthiest. It's a little sacky. For the most part, you can't really stop it. You'd have to like draw a Call by the Grave, and that's also if you're going first. If you're going second and your opponent, play Shifter on their turn going first, what can you really do to stop that? Then maybe Gamma. And so, something worth considering. And then we have, actually, I guess I was wrong about, the highest proportion of people predicting to be banned. It's actually Mind Hacker at 70%. So this is kind of interesting because a lot of Kashtira players, they're starting to go towards, not going for that like 5 zone lock play or 3 zone lock play, whatever, with Mind Hacker. But even then, they're still playing this card, and it can come up depending on the hand that they open, if they have enough protection, for example. And so it's not really healthy anymore, right? I mean, this card was never really played before, well, at least not in the recent times, was not played. And so now that the fact that, you know, people are having to spend money to have to buy multiple copies of the same card that they otherwise would never be playing, solely because it might get ripped out by Mind Hacker. And of course, there's still Cashier Unicorn, but this is the one that's really starting things off on their own turn. And so, you know, I think at least this card could get banned, and that'd be better for everyone. And then we have Ibli, which is a card that was seeing initially a good amount of play in Cashier, but now has actually fallen quite a bit. And you'll notice that if you saw my YCS top cut breakdowns of, you know, the most played hand traps and staples. Ibli, I think a lot of people kind of think that it perhaps ends up just being a brick instead. Still a really strong card against certain matchups, for example, let's say against like Branded, where they don't really or can't really play Link monsters, for example. And so it's still a really strong card. Will it get banned? I'm not really sure. I mean, it's initially when Sprite first came out, during Power of the Elements format, you know, Ibli was another option to go into to lock your opponent out. Never got any consideration there, so probably won't get any changes. And then we have Runic Fountain. This one's kind of interesting because, you know, up until now, Runic was obviously Runic Sprite, when that was like the best deck that had its moment, but it was very brief because we just had the Shizu tier format right after that, and Runic just sort of completely disappeared for the most part. And now it's back. It has a lot of resurgence. Runic Naturia is a really strong deck. Runic for Hire is another contender in terms of, you know, seeing a lot of competitive play now. And, you know, you draw a lot, and I think this is certainly a card maybe won't get hit on this Nexus, but at some point might get some kind of hit. And I think the OCG made a hit to this already. If I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments. And then we also put Zeus. I put this on here mainly because, you know, I had previously tweeted in terms of what cards should I put on this survey, and this was one of them. I mean, I think it's fine. I think, you know, the reason people are playing 2 anyways right now is purely just because of that Cashier matchup. And so, you know, if you get rid of the Mind Hacker, for example, like, you wouldn't really need double Zeus anymore. It's not like the days of like Zodiac, when we had that as one of the best decks. Like, tried to get Zodiac a couple of years ago, for example. At that point, people were saying, you know what, Zeus should be limited, especially that, you know, you should not be able to put your Zeus on top of another Zeus, right, that you might, you know, mind control over or something like that. So I think right now it's probably fine. And then there were also other potential cards that I did not have in my survey, but I allowed people to suggest. And sorry, I'm covering part of the first card, but, you know, Skill Drain is one of the popular ones. I mean, I'm not sure why it ever came back to 3. Realistically, it was a little too much. It's a very, very strong card, and it's not, again, another card that's not really healthy, right? So hopefully that can go back to 1 someday. Runic Tip, another suggestion. Again, I mean, I think it kind of toss up. I mean, maybe they hit with this first instead of the Runic Fountain. Certainly up for debate. And then Cashier Rise Hard. I'm not really sure about this one, especially this early when Cashier just became that tier 1 deck. Probably won't get any kind of hit. And then in terms of limited cards that are right now, you know, Call by the Grave, always a popular one. The play of this card has actually declined rather a lot in terms of YCS topping list, that you'll also notice if you follow those kind of videos that I do. But, you know, I think for the most part, people are expecting it to stay at 1. It's always a debate whether, you know, it should go to 3 or just be banned or just things like that. So it's a really controversial opinion. And then we have Gazelle. I think it's safe to say this card can come to more than 1. I think they're not doing too much right now. I mean, I guess to be fair, it did top YCS Peru, so I don't want to completely discredit it. I think this deck is great, particularly for beginners. I think it's a great deck and a great rogue deck. And it's been, you know, it's crazy how strong this deck was, you know, at some point a few years ago. And I think it's time to bring this guy back. In terms of Misk, though, I'm not too sure about this one. I mean, especially because Konami already tried putting it back to 3 after hitting it the initial time a few years back, and then they realized, oh, maybe that was a mistake, and they had to put it back to 1. So, you know what? Most people do predict it to be 1. Some do think it will come to 2, and perhaps, and we do have some more Dino support coming out soon, I believe. So, who knows what the fate of this card will be. And then we also have Engage. So this was a complete surprise to me when this came back to 1, and something like Harp Horror didn't, for example. But, you know, Sky Striker, it's been at least at like tier 2 level at most, I would say, at some point in the last couple of years, and still a solid choice as a rogue deck now that Ishizu tier stuff is gone in the format. Will this card come to 2? I'm not too sure. The draw effect, you know, it's a really, really strong spell card. Probably one of the best spell cards to ever come out of the game. But I'm sure there's a lot of Sky Striker players out there who would really want this back at 2, and maybe it's fine. But yeah, open to suggestions. And then we have Recital Starling. I think I'm guessing it's probably fine. I'm not too knowledgeable with the bird up deck. I mean, obviously when this was at 1, that deck was not playable. Now you're still seeing some people play bird up, and you would have seen my recent deck profile on this as well. And you know, I think usually you play it at 2 anyways. Correct me again if I'm wrong. I know that standard combo you use 2 in your first turn play, but yeah, not too much to say about this one. And then we have Potted Desires. This was, I remember when it first got limited, was really out of left field. And then, you know, they put it to 2 right after that list. So, you know, still not committed to putting it back to 3. I'm not too sure. This is, you know, compared to Potted Prosperity, nowadays, I think Prosperity is actually more generic than Desires. Not every deck can play Desires. Even though, funnily enough, I think at one point it was actually kind of flipped in terms of which decks could play Desires versus Prosperity. And who knows? I think I'm totally fine either way what happens with this card. And then some other potential cards that could be changed. You know, you have Spellbook of Judgment, Ancient Fairy Dragon, it does have the errata, and then Infernity Archfiend as other potential candidates. So, and also let me know in the comments, you know, what other cards you think could be changed. And then lastly, in terms of the ban section, we have Maxi 98.5% thinking it will still be banned. So thankfully, we do have some logical thinkers out there responding to this survey. And so, you know, if you play Master Duel, which I have not in over a year, you know, this card is certainly really, really powerful. I never personally played it in the TCG when this was legal, but playing it on Master Duel, I'm really realizing the power of this card. And I'm pretty surprised that OCG has this still legal at this point. And then we have Harp Horror, which is, of course, one of the fan favorite cards to always, you know, people hoping that it will come off the list. I'm not too sure. Maybe there's obviously a lot of grave-centric effects now, and what decks could potentially abuse it, but who knows. And then we have Colossus. This card probably will not be able to come back at any point near the future. I think just being able to prevent people from adding cards to their hand is a really strong floodgate. And, you know, with like tier 1 decks or rogue decks, they all need to search. And so this card is a little too strong. And then we also have Electromite. I know I actually played Pendulums at the time that this eventually got banned, which was really, really sad. I would hope to see Electromite come back someday, but who knows? I mean, they did make Beyond the Pendulum, which is sort of like a Walmart version of Electromite, and so I'm not sure if they will ever bring this back now, but, you know, you never know. And then we also have Blaster. This also is a card that just constantly gets mentioned in terms of, you know, card to be put back. I also, again, did not play during this format, so I don't have much to comment on, but you know what? Maybe we'll finally see it. And Zen Mighty was another card that was suggested on the last ban list prediction in terms of coming back. I'm not too sure. It looks like majority still predict it will stay banned, but you know what? Again, you never know. And then the last one I had put on the survey was Masterpiece. I'm surprised that 15% actually think this card can come back. It's, I mean, maybe it's fine. I'm not sure. Again, I didn't play during this format. I actually did play True Draco as my first competitive deck when I first started playing, like early 2019, and that was after Masterpiece was banned. And of course, that was like very, you know, Floodgate heavy deck. So, you know, I think anything like Floodgate heavy-ish, like it's not the best to promote it. But you know what? Again, I mean, what do I know, right? So maybe this comes back someday, and who knows. And then some other suggestions. Glow Up Bulb, I believe this was recently released in the OCG, so maybe that's why people answered it that way. Dryden is another card. It's kind of funny because it keeps flipping back and forth. It's been banned, came back, tried to get Zodiac from it, and eventually got banned again. And it's kind of funny how, you know, even though it's just one pop, it can get really strong compared with other cards, but at the same time, perhaps it's actually in this format, it's still fine to bring it back. Block Dragon, though, I'm not really sure. I don't know if you guys ever played at Emancipator during the early days of the pandemic when this card was legal. It was actually insanity in terms of the amount of the board presence they will put up and the follow-up on your turn, because Block Dragon will just like add another 3 cards. It was just absolutely crazy. At Emancipator, of course, is seeing almost 0 play right now in terms of competitive play, so who knows what will happen with Block Dragon. We never got to see IRL success with full power at Emancipator, but I'm not too sure about Block Dragon at this point. And so some other questions in terms of satisfaction, you know, in terms of your satisfaction level with the current format, you know, you had about like 47, 48% being satisfied or very satisfied with the current format, which is higher than the last time I did this in my previous ban list prediction survey during that Ishizu tier format. And so, you know, I think people are at least enjoying the diversity of the format more than the last one. And similar question to that is, you know, how much you enjoy it compared to previous format, and which I always ask because I'm curious whether people always just complain about the current format and never enjoy the current format. I always think that the last one was better, but this time not really, actually. I know I think there are definitely a good chunk of people that do enjoy this format more. There are more decks that are playable, and particularly rogue decks, which a lot of players really care a lot about, right? And so of course there's going to be a handful of players who like that last format better, right? Because, you know, they did describe it as a more skillful format, whereas right now this format is definitely a little bit tied towards, you know, locking your opponents out. But, you know, that's kind of been the history of this game, a lot of the instances. So, you know, I'm pretty indifferent, but I think it's cool to see. And then in terms of the prediction of when the actual ban list will be out, looks like most predict it will be in May. We do have YCS, the 250th YCS happening this weekend at the time of recording, so obviously it's not going to be released anytime before that. You know, people do need time to prepare for in-person events. So you know what, I'm curious. I think the last two lists have actually came out pretty fast, within like a couple months, at least in terms of announcement. Whether when that takes into effect will be you know, a week or two after. But you know what, I think they've been pretty good lately, and I hope they can continue with that trend. But I think with this list, it doesn't really have to be a big list. So that's it for the ban list prediction survey results. Hopefully you found that interesting, and again, a big thanks to those that participated, and hopefully you participate in future surveys as well, and more of you, so we can get more responses. So as usual, a big thanks to my Patreons as well: Eileen Dice Queen, Bolt Spider, Cybernetic, Brandon Jaren, Barrel Lord, Spooky Boogie, Stephen Phillips, Chaz Blanks, and Barbados. Really appreciate your support, and well, take care guys.